and his BA from the University of Rochester in 2002. And over the years, he also has spent very considerable time doing field research in Taiwan, a little bit in the mainland as well, and making what I think I can fairly say has been a years-long effort. It probably takes that to get reasonably competent in learning Chinese language, which I'm sure was important to him during what was, I think, at least 4 or 5 field trips to Taiwan to conduct the research that formed the basis for his doctoral dissertation, which was entitled The Origins and Decline of Dominant Party Systems, Taiwan's Transition in Comparative Perspective. He's going to talk mainly about the Taiwan piece of this puzzle here today, although he may say a little about the wider comparative puzzle. But from what I've seen, this is a really important, creative, and very exhaustive study of what happens to one-party dominant systems that emerge after transition to democracy. And the study yields some extremely interesting and surprising findings that I think are going to have a big impact not only on Taiwan studies, but on the field of comparative politics. And he's continuing to do a lot of other research, both on Taiwan and comparatively. He has a separate paper. If you have any questions about this, you might want to ask him afterwards, on the puzzling decline of Taiwan's military expenditure, why military expenditures have been declining in Taiwan, while obviously the threat from the mainland has been increasing. And he's also doing a lot of work more generally to look at institutional designs in democracies and their implications for democratic stability. So Kharis, thank you for coming out from the University of Michigan, and the floor is yours.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. If I stand here, can everyone see me and hear me all right? Yeah, in the back? Okay, wonderful. I'll try to project. I'm going to move towards the screen and back a little bit during this talk, so I'll just do most of my presentation here. The title of my talk today is A Premature Defeat, Reassessing the Critical 2000 Presidential Election in Taiwan. And I'm going to focus on the 2000 election in particular, because this is the election that brought the DPP to power in Taiwan, the Democratic Progressive Party, or the longtime opposition in Taiwan. And conversely, knocked the longtime ruling party, the Kuomintang, or KMT, out of power in Taiwan. And so this is kind of the critical moment in Taiwan's transition to democracy, when we first get rotation in power. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, I expect most of you know this history by heart already, but for those who don't, Taiwan is a medium-sized island off the coast of China. It's been ruled for most of its history in the 20th century by a government that did not control China, the Greater China area. And in fact, since 1949 until 2000, the ruling party in Taiwan was the Chinese Nationalist Party, or the Kuomintang. I'm going to use the term KMT for short. Taiwan, until 1987, was under martial law. And Taiwan's transition to democracy started in 1987 when martial law was lifted. Opposition parties were eventually legalized. Restrictions on freedom of speech and assembly were slowly lifted. And eventually we had a gradual KMT-managed top-down transition to fully contested elections for both the president and the legislature in Taiwan. In 1996, we had then this process culminate in the first direct election of the president, and the KMT incumbent president, Lee Teng-hui, won that election and served until 2000. The event that I want to focus on today, though, is at the end of this long process. In 2000, in the second direct presidential election, the KMT nominee was defeated in what was widely at the time considered quite an upset. In fact, Larry at one point wrote that it was an electoral earthquake. And so this is actually the first peaceful transfer of power. So I don't think it's exaggeration to say this is probably the most critical moment in Taiwan's transition to democracy. And so for that reason alone, it's worth understanding. Right. So to make sure that we all understand kind of the basic facts about this election, in 2000, Lee Teng-hui, the incumbent president, was term limited out of office, and so the KMT ran a new candidate, Lian Zhan. The sitting vice president was basically handpicked by Lee Teng-hui to run as the official nominee. And then we had a second KMT candidate, James Song, or Song Chu, who, when he did not win the nomination, 3 months before the election, came out and ran an independent campaign. And then the third candidate, major candidate, is Chen Shui-bian, former Taipei mayor, and he ran for the longtime opposition Democratic Progressive Party, the Minjin. And as most of you know, the results actually, Lian Zhan came in, I hope you all can see this, in an embarrassing third place, with only about 23% of the vote. James Song proved much more popular, came in second with 36% of the vote, almost 37. And Chen Shui-bian ended the KMT's era of dominance with less than 40% of the vote. Right. So we have a minority presidential winner here who ends this period of KMT control. Now I'm going to suggest that this is a very puzzling outcome. And it's puzzling for several different reasons. The biggest is that the KMT, according to most observers at the time, probably should not have lost this election. Right? The KMT, for one, initiated these elections, this process of transitioning to full democracy. And if you read statements from KMT leaders during the mid-1990s, they really don't expect this process to lead to their own defeat. Otherwise, why initiate elections in the first place? And if you go beyond the KMT, beyond the party, and look at observers who don't have some loyalty to the KMT, most observers outside the party also expected the KMT to continue on in power and not to lose. And so, in fact, most people in the early 1990s predicted that Taiwan would go the way of Japan, where you have a single, or had, up until the 1990s, a single dominant party in power. Opposition parties are allowed to contest. They do every election, and they invariably lose, and the dominant power continues in office. And so you have Taiwanese scholars making this prediction. You have scholars with one foot in the American community and the Taiwanese community making this prediction. And you even have folks like Samuel Huntington, who really don't have many ties to Taiwan at all, also kind of making the same prediction, that Taiwan looks like it's headed in the direction of Japan, where the KMT is likely to remain the dominant party, with the Democratic Progressive Party confined to a permanent opposition position. Right. So, the third part of this puzzle is that the KMT has been surprisingly, I would say, resilient since the 2000 election. Rather than falling apart, disintegrating, and being replaced by something new, the party has come back. And as you're probably all aware, the KMT is now back in power. The KMT's candidate Ma Ying-jeou won the 2008 election in a landslide, and he was re-elected in 2012, and so we are going to have, most likely at minimum, another 8-year period of KMT rule in Taiwan. This case is also puzzling, and even more puzzling, in fact, if you step away from the Taiwan literature and just put on your comparative politics cap and think about this in general terms. And so, dominant party defeat in the comparative politics literature is usually explained by reference to resources. So, long-lived dominant party rule is driven by ruling party resource advantages. And there's some dispute in the literature, or different emphases on how this process works. But if you have money and control of state resources, that can be used to buy loyalty of elites. So perhaps you keep James Song from leaving the party if you can pay him enough. It buys the support of voters, sometimes very literally. You take a dump truck of money out into a village and dump a bunch of money there and make sure that you get enough votes to win the election. And more subtly, it actually keeps opposition candidates extreme. So if you, as a potential opposition party member, care mostly about winning election, and the playing field is tilted against the opposition party, well, why not go ahead and join the dominant party? Because you can at least get into office then. And so the candidates who join the opposition party tend to be more ideologically motivated and often more radical. And so you get, oftentimes in these party systems, extremist opposition parties competing against a centrist incumbent. And that process is sustained over time by this resource imbalance. So that all of these mechanisms have the same punchline, and that is that when resources run out, dominant parties lose. But as long as you have a major resource advantage, though, dominant parties should persist in power indefinitely. Now, if you know anything about Taiwanese politics, this argument should strike you as a little bit odd, right? Resource explanations in Taiwan prior to 2000 do not make a whole lot of sense as an explanation for why the KMT lost. Right? So the KMT's net worth directly prior to the 2000 election is conservatively estimated at something like $4 billion. This is money in party coffers that they can use for whatever ends they want. The DPP, the major opposition party's net worth, by contrast, is less than $1 million at this point. And the party, throughout the 1990s, has a hard time paying party worker salaries, has to rely mostly on volunteer efforts to mobilize and to organize. Let me actually talk a little bit about this picture as well. This is the former KMT party headquarters. Very imposing edifice, just down the street from Taiwan's presidential hall. Right? This was built with KMT money, and it represents what the KMT is capable of at the end of the 1990s. Right? So not only control of all of this resources, but also control of the civil service, control of the media for the most part in Taiwan. They have a long history of very close ties with the military. The military in some ways is still politicized at this time. Budgets in Taiwan, the KMT has a complete majority, absolute majority, and so as long as the party itself can agree on budgetary allocations, opposition parties can't do anything. State-owned enterprises, the KMT, use these for partisan ends. So all of these things could be used in a partisan fashion to improve the KMT's candidates' prospects for re-election. And then finally, unlike some dominant party defeats, in Taiwan, there is strong economic growth through the 2000 election. So rather than a decline in the economy leading to a dearth of party resources, here's the picture of the economy over the 4 years leading up to 2000. And you'll note a couple of things. There's a period of low growth here, which is the Asian financial crisis. It's in late 1997, early 1998. Taiwan comes out of the financial crisis. First, it's affected less than most other countries in the region, and it comes out of this crisis in much better shape than most of the other countries. Certainly better than South Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, or the Philippines.
These are quarters?
These are quarterly data, that's right. And so what I draw your attention to is the trend line here. We're heading upward. So if the patterns of near-term economic growth affect voting, we tend to focus on the last 2 quarters before the election. And in fact, there's a strong period of growth, right, which predicts that the incumbent should be favored in the coming election. And so let me suggest there's a big puzzle here. Now, when we turn to the Taiwan literature on this election, we end up with a bunch of very kind of idiosyncratic explanations that revolve around personality conflicts or personality characteristics. So one explanation you sometimes see is that Chen Shui-bian was a superstar candidate in Taiwan. He was a local boy made good, the son of Taiwan. Right? It seems a little strange to say this now, but at the time he was widely popular. He had been the mayor of Taipei, which is a predominantly pro-KMT city. He actually won an election in that